All right,
Excellent, excellent.
Go back into your introduction.
Yeah, no, again, it's just really cool to see somebody with familiar faces. So, it just tells you, frankly, how small our community really is, and kind of the universe of leaders who are touching a lot of different things. And so, so jumping right into the first question, you know, what has COVID meant to the real estate community? You know what? If you have an answer to that, you know, you may be sitting on a pot of gold going forward. Right now, it is so in flux, and let's try to kind of segment this down. So just one step back. So my company is a really unique company. Yes, we're a real estate development company, but we're focused mostly in biotech development, and so we build labs and lab space for biotech. So we occupy a really unique segment of the real estate community. So keep that in mind, and kind of how I texture my comments. So real estate, big picture, there are going to be some shifts. There are going to be some shifts in what does the future of work mean in the office, right? You're going to hear a lot of think pieces, a lot of pontificators talking about, oh my God, we're going to go to a permanent shift to working from home. We're going to see these dramatic changes in how people, want to be, near each other, density and spaces, et cetera, et cetera. And I personally I don't like to replace one dogma with another. And I am always mindful of recognizing history and recognizing the fundamental nature of humans as social beings. Number one, we have a habit of being biased to our own times and thinking that our times are so unique that no one else in history has ever experienced this, and our time is so unique that we're going to change the course of history, right? Like that's such a narcissistic way of looking at human history. Like, number one, we've survived pandemics before. Cities have had pandemics, cultures, societies have had pandemics, and somehow humans and cities and the desire to connect at that social level has never dissipated. So as we're in the middle of this, will there be changes in behavior? Absolutely, there'll be changes in behavior. But the need for cities to come, for cities to thrive will not change. And so when you think about what that means for real estate, in the near term, office workers, you're not going to see the density, for this particular crisis until we have a vaccine, until we have adequate testing capacity and contact tracing and all those things. You're not going to get people comfortable in coming into dense working environments like you've seen in the past. You see that the impact is really most noticeable at the retail level, at the ground floor retail of any business office. They rely on those workers coming into downtown. They're getting hit hard. And so what is the future of small and local businesses? The future of your favorite mom and pop retail establishment? What is the future of those, and will they be able to survive the long term? Those are questions that remain to be seen. We had I saw an interesting two kind of bookend approaches to the future of working from home. Yesterday, Microsoft's CEO, Satya Nadella, he talked about some warnings about any shift to permanently working from home. And he really talked about kind of the social nature of wanting to be with other people. And then today in the Wall Street Journal, Satya's piece was in New York Times. In the Wall Street Journal today, you had Mark Zuckerberg talk about, he predicts in the next 10 years, half of his 45,000 person workforce will be working from home. I tend to lean towards what Satya is saying around the future of work because of the deep need to remain socially connected. I think that's where things are going to shake out. But there was an interesting article talking about what these potential shifts could make, and this is a kind of the most optimistic view I have of the future of cities and what it means for real estate. It was by Richard Florida, and it was a short piece in Foreign Policy magazine. There were 5 other kind of urban policy people talking about the future of cities. And he mentioned a really good point. It's like, yes, will there be some families who move out of dense cities and look for single-family homes with a backyard, because space is a privilege, right? Having that space to be able to walk outside, not be confined to your home, is a luxury. Will some people who have the means do that? Absolutely. That being said, cities will always be a magnet for young people, young talented people, young people who want to experience different, expose themselves to different cultures and different ways of life, and what cities have always served that purpose, and that'll continue to happen. And he took one further step. He looked at cities like San Francisco and New York, cities that have become hyper gentrified. Will this be a bit of a reset potentially? Those places where those neighborhoods that were priced out for these folks, will there be an equilibrium or some correction in the market that allows young artists and other folks to repopulate center cities and bringing back some of the interesting creative energy that was lost because so many of these people were priced out. So right now, the answer to your question, what has COVID done to real estate? It has made this thing so volatile across the board. And will cities die? Absolutely not, because cities are dependent on people. And at the end of the day, people want to be in dynamic places where there's opportunities, not just economically, but opportunities for social advancement, social engagement. And urbanization, the force behind urbanization, in many ways counters any and can overcome any threat of infectious disease in that sense. Because again, this is not the first time.
One of the things you said that we got to be pretty narcissistic to think that this is unprecedented times. Mm-hmm. And I don't agree. I do think this is unprecedented times. And I also see, I just saw yesterday that Square and Twitter are going remotely indefinitely. And then Google and Facebook both said that they're going to be remote to the remainder of 2020, regardless of what their prospective governors or states do. So that's really going to affect us in a lot of ways. Like you said, the articles you're reading and the different things that you're seeing. But this is unprecedented times, especially for us that are living in this time. I know we had Spanish flu and things like that, but talk about that a little bit more, because I need to be convinced that I'm a narcissist.
Well, no. So if you frame it like, well, this is unique to our time because we're living it, we're experiencing it the first time. Yeah, it's unique to us, but the Spanish flu killed 50 million people, and so that is on the scale that we're talking about of calamity. And so and that was in between. That was after the First World War. That was before the Great Depression, before World War II. The cities that were decimated by the Spanish flu, New York, Paris, London, Chicago, they didn't go away. Those cities did not go away. And the dark pieces that I hear from people saying, oh my God, this is the end of New York. This is the end of San Francisco. This is the end. It's like I don't know if they're looking for clickbait on their pieces or not, but will they be impacted? Absolutely. I'm not saying this is something to be dismissed. I'm saying there's something resilient about people. There's something resilient about cities. There's something resilient about social networks if they're strong enough. because we have examples of that in the past. And so again, like when people say, again, are we in a unique time, and our world, the projection of the future will change dramatically? I personally don't see it. Will there be changes? Absolutely. Our public health infrastructure. I'm hoping that this changes how we see the threat of infectious disease on a global scale like this. But that requires a unified leadership globally, and we're not seeing that right now. And so
your fellow alum, she definitely backed you up. So just so you know what's going on in the chat.
All right.
She like, oh, I got his back.
Hi, Raquan. How are you? There we go.
Oh, I appreciate that. So before we move forward, let's go back a little bit. And thank you for those comments, and thank you for standing by it. I do agree that the New York is not going away, and none of the other places. And I do agree that you are definitely going to get those clickbait articles, that fake news out there, because they do want us to read it. And then guess what? The media is full of hysteria, and fear. And so, of course, that's what they're doing. They're invoking that fear amongst us, which is horrible, but it's just that reality. But I do want to go back a little further and talk about you as an individual. Talk about, your background. I know you and Julie are friends. Y'all traveled the earth together. But even before all of that, talk about your history. What's your economic story? For those of you that don't know, Brian was a part of the Economy Challenge Day. He was on the Leadership Tomorrow Curriculum Committee for quite some time. And so he was responsible for planning this day. So just tell us, what's your economic story? Where did you come from? What's your background?
So my background, I've been in Seattle for over 20 years now. And before that, I grew up in Oklahoma. My mother is a Korean immigrant. My father's African-American. I was born in Korea and came to the States when I was 5. And, growing up, we were, lower middle class family. And I watched my parents really hustle to really provide a life for me and my brother that allowed us to think about opportunities, that allowed us to think of ourselves in kind of in a future tense, like what the possibilities could be. My mother, she worked as a janitor. She worked in my middle school cafeteria. She was a cashier. She owned a donut shop, a sandwich shop, all kind of hustling. She hustled, and she's a classic, if you had a stereotypical, image of kind of what a strong immigrant mother is willing to do to support her family, she's a poster child for that. And she had a level of pride and hard work that was instilled within our family. My father, he was a 20-year military veteran. When he left the military, he worked as a mechanic, aircraft mechanic. And one thing that my parents really instilled in me and my younger brothers, like, there's nobility in work, and whatever work you are involved with, there's nobility in it. And in my family, my father's side, you see all the entire spectrum of where we've got doctors and lawyers in my family, and I have second cousins who are formerly criminally justice involved, and they run the gamut. And so I've been able to see across class within my own family and what class struggle looks like. And I remember, I for about a period, about 4 or 5 years, when my parents were trying to kind of get a foothold in we lived in my grandfather's mobile home in rural Oklahoma, and it was one of those things where I never knew that we were poor per se because we had what we needed, but in hindsight, I look back and I saw poverty in my face all the time. But what I think allowed those communities that we lived in to keep living, keep striving was they had community, right? And so, and when I translate my experience to my career and how I view economic development, am I proud of Seattle as being a prosperous community? Absolutely. I'm proud that this is one of the most robust, economically diverse places in the world, and that I'm a big booster in that. I'm also proud in the fact that, I got to work on issues such as the minimum wage and lead that piece, and glad that Seattle was one of the first city, frankly, to get to $15. And I'm a believer of both and thinking. It's like, hell yeah, we can be prosperous and wealthy, and hell yeah, we can provide economic opportunity as many people who can touch the economy as possible. And so that has really, so my experience growing up really framed kind of my philosophy on what good economic development can be. I'm a big believer in what Seattle can do as being a place where, again, wealth can be generated here and wealth can be shared.
I love it. And because of your past, because of your history and the work that you're doing, the work that you've done, how are you right now contributing to the economic opportunity of others? And before you answer that, I just wanted to remind you, which you may already know, you may not, but this year's theme for Leadership Tomorrow is racism as a leadership issue. And so in dealing with contributing to the economic opportunity of others, how are you doing that for folks that are less fortunate? What does that look like for you in your life right now?
So it's been interesting, the transition. I left the city of Seattle. I used to be the city's economic development director. I left the city a little over 2 years ago. And that's where I know a bunch of the folks on this call. And, obviously working in public service, you're in the thick of things. And so you're able to influence some things. When I made the decision to go into the private sector, I'll be really frank. It took me a while. I'm still, to a certain extent, still processing and trying to find my way. Like, how do I work in a corporate environment that is pretty clear on what its objectives are, shareholder value. We're a publicly traded company. Like, ultimately, that's what matters, right, for this particular corporation. And so how do I leverage the resources and of a corporate entity and my position within that entity to return, to give back to the community and at the systemic level. And so on a personal level, what being at this company has allowed me to do is, frankly, I've got a little more free time. And this is another funny thing. I no disrespect to anyone working in the private sector, but what's been fascinating to me is that the perception of people in the private sector of government folks has been stunning. It's the folks, at least in my small sampling, my corporate, these folks, my colleagues currently, they work really hard. They work really, really hard. But when I tell them, people in public service, the complexity of managing and running a city as dynamic as Seattle, and yes, there'll always be those folks who punch their clock, 9 to 5 and be done with it. But there are a lot of dedicated public servants who bust their behinds 60, 70, 80 hours a week and never have the same kind of reward system recognizing that. And part of that's been my education back to my corporate colleagues and executives around, if we as a development company want to engage in community and be good community stewards and good community partners, we have to have a level of respect for our partners in the public sector. And I hope slowly, I've been able to influence that thinking on the corporate side. On my personal side, I've been able to do a little bit more on kind of my civic engagement. I'm able to join boards, for the first time in a long time. Proud to be on the Fair Start board. Proud to be on the Downtown Emergency Service Center board, which is a homeless services organization that works with those experiencing homelessness who have severe mental health and addiction problems. So they work with folks on one end of that homelessness spectrum that are really, really challenging to serve. I'm also on the board of the Seattle 2030 district, looking at pushing developers like ourselves to really push the envelope on clean technology adoption. And so it's allowed, so being on the corporate side now has given me, because I don't work 70 hours a week like I did when I was at the city, allows me to engage in issues that are really meaningful to me. So that's how I'm giving back on a personal level. Corporate wide, it's been interesting. We're in 7 different markets right now: San Diego, San Francisco, Seattle, New York, Boston, and DC, and the Research Triangle in North Carolina. And I've been able to help at the corporate level revamp our corporate giving strategy. Recently, we made a really significant contribution to the Robin Hood Foundation in New York, which is the largest poverty fighting organization in New York. And it was the first time our company's ever really been engaged in something like that. And I'm not going to take credit that, because Brian came, this corporation decided to do that. But I am proud that I was at the table to help shape our company's thinking, not not just writing a check, but thinking about what is the long-term engagement that we can have there. And so, and then lastly, just big picture, maybe I buy into our kind of corporate spiel about Alexandria being more than just a real estate developer. But again, our focus is on working with life science and biotech companies to help them find cures to diseases. We build the buildings for these really smart people to do the work that they do. And not only do we build buildings, but we also are venture investors in these companies. And I am proud that in Seattle specifically, we've got at least 5 different organizations working directly on the COVID response, from testing to diagnostics to looking at potential therapeutics and vaccines. So those are companies in our own backyard who happen to be our tenant clients. There's companies that work on hopefully the next revolution on immunotherapies for cancer. And I'm just proud that we're involved as a company in that, as not only as landlords, but we're investors, but we're also thought partners with these folks. So from the personal, I still remain committed to the social and civic issues that drive me. And I'm also proud of being part of a company that is really trying to, again, create the spaces and the infrastructure for people to really address some of the most challenging issues that our world faces.
Thank you for that. So I want to just take a quick pause. We had an interview earlier with Wee Yin at the new restaurant, and we have this interview tonight. So we've had 2 interviews today, and it's amazing that a lot of folks came back. And so I know that they really were interested in hearing from you. And so I just want to say to everybody that's on the line, if you have questions, please type them in the chat, because we want to get through them, get through your questions as much as possible. My questions are just, helping you all to start to develop your own questions. But we do have one question from Bish. He says, Brian, can you tell us a little bit more about your role in the $15 minimum wage passage? How did you get desperate groups to reach consensus, and how did you know that it was the right time to act? Did LT alumni help in the process, and could they have? And then several of us are trying to figure out effective engagement and changing and change making right now.
So
that was
great,
a lot of questions,
great.
I know, right?
There's a lot of questions. So yeah, the $15 minimum wage, that was such a crazy process. I remember this was going back to when Ed Murray was first elected as mayor, and during the transition, I was at the city working. I was a deputy director of economic development at the time, and it was during the transition. He had not even officially taken office, and he reached out to me in November, asked if I'd be willing to join his administration as a senior policy advisor. And so, yeah, sure, I definitely, huge honor. And he goes, oh, by the way, I want you to be my lead staffer on the minimum wage. I'm like, oh, okay. And we need to do this by the end of May of next year. I'm like, whoa, it was Seattle process, number one, crazy divisive issue, number two, and who's going to want to, how are we going to get this done, right? So the short answer is a process like this, it speaks to a couple things. At the big picture, the macro level, the city of Seattle, and I'm a believer in context. I'm a believer in context and history. That's why I like the whole thing about the beginning, we can't be narcissistic and think like this is so special, so unique. There was something happening contextually in Seattle that said, you know what, this is the time. If we don't do it now, it is not going to happen, or it's going to be a bloody fight that could really divide this community going forward. So we have a window. We have a short window, whether it's 4 months, 5 months, or 6 months, it doesn't matter. We have a window, a new mayor that made a commitment to do this. And then we strategically identified folks from labor, folks from the community, and folks from the business community that had standing in their respective communities, but also wanted to get to where we wanted to get to. So we formed this 40-person task force of the motliest crew of people that was around, and we spent literally the first 2.5 months debating, arguing, figuring out, what's the right lever, is it $15 tomorrow? Is it $15 in 10 years or somewhere in between? How do we gauge that? And I remember, I think I got fired twice during that process. The first time, I think, by the mayor.
Oh,
by
okay.
The mayor, because the mayor wanted this deal done. And the first time that I think the mayor almost fired me was, we thought we had a deal done. It was in early April. We thought we had a deal done. We had a handshake deal, and we had a huge press conference. We had international press was there. The room was packed full of people, and the mayor was about to go on. I come rushing into the mayor. It's like, Mayor, we don't have a deal. We don't have a deal. We need to cancel this press conference. It's not going to happen.
So he was like, you're fired.
He said, okay, well, first he was calm. Okay, we'll cancel it. We'll figure this out. An hour later, he's like, he fired me basically, but called me back 2 hours later, said, okay, let's figure this thing out. The second time he fired me, this is where, towards the end, where there was a moment where, this is kind of my own personal philosophy. It's like, of course I know we all have bosses, right? We all have bosses that we've got to recognize and understand who are the influencers, who are the ultimate decision makers. But at the same time, I've always prided myself in being able to speak my truth to folks. Speak my truth in a way that they can hear it as much as possible. And it was at the beginning of May of that year, the business community was getting really, really frustrated with labor and feeling like labor was calling all the shots and running rampant. And we had an evening meeting with the mayor, kind of giving him the latest update. And I told the mayor, the business community, especially because you had some of the ethnic businesses becoming more prominent in the debate, like they have a point here. They have a really strong point around this is ramping up way too fast, and we got to make sure that we can calibrate it the right way. They've offered an alternative that we need to take seriously and try to find a way to fit in if we want to keep this coalition together. And at that point, the mayor was getting some serious heat from labor. And that night he said, Brian, you disappoint me. You're not giving me a choice. You're basically fired. That night I was fired. The next morning I was unfired. He said, okay, let's figure this thing out with business. And 2 days later we got the deal. And, the 40-person committee, we had one no vote, one abstention, and the rest voted yes for this thing. And then it sailed through. And so, so that was kind of the short version of just kind of how crazy that process. Where LT was helpful and LT alums were really, really helpful. We had a symposium at Seattle University in March during the middle of that process, a day-long symposium where we had academics, we had community members, really engaged in kind of fact-finding and some respectful debate on income inequality, challenges with system failures and lack of social safety net, et cetera. And putting on that symposium was a ridiculous challenge. And I leaned on, frankly, my LT alums to really help my classmates to help, kind of put together that symposium, bring in as many outside voices as possible. Because the problem with government sometimes, and especially the way we do politics now, is you only talk to the people that you know, right? And I felt at my heart of heart, like if we were going to make this thing happen, this minimum wage happen, we needed to expand the conversation as much as possible. And that's where LT came into play, because the people at City Hall, they're in a bubble, but my LT classmates and friends, they touch other aspects of the community and they help bring a lot of that perspective in. And at the end of the day, as painful as as painful it is for some businesses to deal with the wage increases and labor costs, et cetera, I felt at the end of the day there was an immense level of pride in this community for being the first to do this, and recognizing, again, that principle of like, this is a wealthy community, damn it, we should be able to do this, and we should be able to do this in the right way and do it smart. So. Long answer. Sorry.
We have a couple questions around social distancing and getting back to our new normal. So the first question, and I'll ask them together, and I can break it up later, but I think they kind of go together. One is, in addition to social distancing, there's a psychological component to prevent people from re-engaging with corporate spaces again. How can we change the spaces and help people overcome their fears, whether they're real or perceived? And then the second part of that is coming from someone else. It says, piggybacking on the first question about social distancing, especially in lab and research spaces built by you all, Alexandria, in the open concept spaces like lab bays and open workstations and cubicles, how can we help people stay safe and feel safe?
Yeah, well, the first question is kind of a bigger commentary. I think there's something maybe unique to the American mindset when it comes to dealing with something like a pandemic, dealing with something like coronavirus. requires such a collective action that Americans, I don't know if it's in our DNA, right? Like we pride ourselves in this mythology of this individualism, like, you know, I'm going to do it on my own, and you know, the government and all this other stuff is not going to hold me back. They're not going to tell me what to do. On one hand, there's like, okay, there's something admirable about, you know, that mythology, but that collective action of, you know what, wearing a mask is not really about you. Wearing a mask is actually about protecting the other people, and being able to not be so narcissistic about yourself, but recognizing that, you know what, this is a gesture. This is my gesture to others, that I care about you, that I love. I don't know you, but I care about you as a fellow citizen, a fellow resident, a fellow member of my community, and I'm going to protect you so you protect your family. It's like there's something broken in that, and frankly, the failure of our national leadership to not address to acknowledge that, I think that has crippled our ability to respond to this crisis effectively. And the numbers that you see every single day, we're having a 9/11 every single day with the death toll around this, and that failure to act collectively will forever tarnish our response when we go into history. At the micro level, you know, it may take years for us to be fully comfortable, you know, in coming back to our work settings. Again, the first step is, you know, you have to ask yourself, you as an individual, like, what would it take? What would it take for you to get on an airplane again? What would it take for you, short of a vaccine, right? Short of a clear-cut vaccine that says, you know what, you get this shot, you're good. What would need to happen, you know? And I go through that mental checklist myself, and it's hard. It's really, really hard. And, you know, I think companies are trying to figure this thing out. A friend of mine who works at Microsoft China was telling me that, you know, as they reopen their offices in China, about 50% of their workforce are coming back, who are comfortable in coming back, but their space needs are going to office space needs are going to continue to grow, because I think the days of open office there's going to be a swing. I think you're going to need more private space. You'll need more space for folks. There just has to be a deeper level of consciousness of the employee of making them feel safe and secure in those tight spaces. But at the end of the day, it just takes a collective will, and that's, frankly, I'm proud of Washington State and how we've been able to deal with this. You know, there's something to be said that we're letting science kind of drive as much as possible good policy decisions.
I was just about to ask you. You mentioned your friend that's at Microsoft China, and I know that you do a lot of research and read all the articles every day. Are you seeing any trends or any particular folks who are doing it right, like coming back right, or starting their economy back up right, or doing things where you see, oh, you know what, that might work, or, you know, have you identified any of that?
No, not off the bat. To be honest with you, I feel like Washington State's is a model, frankly, for the rest of the country. And in the American context, given how fragmented our policy response has been, our public health infrastructure has been, I think we're doing, with what we have and the realities that we have, we are a model for the rest of the country. Like, we were the hot spot. We were the place where the outbreak really came to the fore, and I really think we're doing it right. And only time will tell, you know. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I just want to let you know that you're getting some shout outs in the comment section. People are quoting you, quotation marks, you know, science will save us and the art will get us through. I don't know you, but I love you. So we're gonna be hashtagging that on social media, making sure that those
No, I
quotes
appreciate it.
are getting out there. And somebody said, Brian for mayor. They want you to, they want you to run. So getting back to some of the questions.
So talk to my wife on that.
She gonna be like, yeah, sit down somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking about, what we're currently going through, our current economic conditions, especially with COVID-19 and everything that's going on. What do you think we can do? Like the individuals on the call, what can we do differently? Like, I mean, I know that a lot of us aren't, living in fear of what could happen or what, and not knowing what we should do. If the economy opens back up, do we go back to the work or do we protest or whatever? What do you think we could be doing differently?
Oh my God, that's such a hard question. No, I was, I'm in a kind of a separate chat with some of my friends, and we're just talking about feeling so helpless through all this, right? There's so many just forces at play here. And if any, one of the biggest lessons that this pandemic has shown for all of us is, like, I think intellectually, we all knew that there are system failures, right? And there's so many ways we can kind of mask those system failures, from health disparity to income inequality, the privilege of being able to work from home, what's essential and what's not, and all those things. And this pandemic has brought all those things. They're just naked. They're just naked in front of us, and it's overwhelming, right? Part of it is, and my response to people is like, what in your own world do you think you have some influence in, right? Because if you start thinking like that systems level, and like it could be so overwhelming, you become paralyzed. You can't do anything, right? So the question becomes, in your world, what can you touch? What can you influence? A friend of mine, he's a school teacher here. Last week, he's also kind of he moonlights as a barbecue chef on the side. He's like, you know what, Brian, I'm gonna make some barbecue and go down to Union Gospel Mission and give it to the folks there. Just like that part of it, like just at that personal, at that human level. Is it going to change the world? Is it going to change how we deal with the homelessness crisis? No, but he felt like he needed to act. And so the question becomes, in your world, whether you're in the healthcare space or if you work for a tech company, you're using your expertise, your networks, what can you do? The fact you guys are all in Leadership Tomorrow tells me that there's something that's driven you to this place. And so you have to find that level of action, and no action is too small or too big. And so you just have to find it. And there's plenty of work that needs to be done. It's there. It's there.
Thank you for that. I think Hal was agreeing with you, and maybe he even put this in there before you even said it, but he did talk about, matter of fact, never mind. He says, building off of how Brian is proud of Washington State for following science and applying stringent stay-at-home guidance, it seems like we are privileged with our tech community, and other states do not have the same. And so I guess he just wanted you to kind of talk about that a little bit more. He said, is it only the privileged who are able to stay or work from home and order things online and still be safe and come out of this at a greater advantage?
Well, here's one big shift that I hope happens, post-COVID is, the United States, we don't have a social safety net that's worth anything, and it's interesting, like the phrase essential employee, right? Essential employee, like that has so many connotations, right? Like what, like, oh, you're essential, but I'm not essential? Like,
right,
well,
right.
What does that mean, right?
Yeah.
And so, and going back to history, by the way, in the 1918 pandemic, the phrase essential worker was coined during that time, as well. And so it's interesting, like the essential employees in this context healthcare workers, obviously, but grocery store workers, delivery people, like there's such a huge gap on, like, if you look at those employees by themselves, like we've elevated to a certain extent historically low wage earners, as essential to function, right? Because those people serve the rest of us, right? The rest of us who have the luxury of working from home, we have those. I'm grateful that they're out there, but they're working on with no protections, literally financial or otherwise. Like they're out there, a level of sacrifice that I personally, I recognize my own privilege. Like, I don't know if I could do that. Could I go to work every single day in these conditions? I have the luxury and the privilege not to. And so the question becomes for us, those essential workers are not going to go away. The service industry and the service economy is here. The question for us as Americans is, like, are we going to create finally the social safety net to protect those folks? Because it's the fact that there's debate on additional $2 of hazard pay that has to be negotiated for workers, I think it's obscene. The fact that again, the fact that our healthcare system or your health insurance is tied to whether or not you have a job or not is a disgrace, right? There's just some fundamental things that we as a society need to answer those questions and make some choices, because this ain't going to be the only pandemic, and this ain't the big one. You talk to any expert in infectious disease, they theorize and they game test this all the time. There are viruses that will be even more contagious and even more deadly than what we're seeing now, and this has shown how woefully ill-prepared our public health system is, woefully ill-prepared our economic system is, woefully ill-prepared our social safety net is. And we're failing that right now because we're still debating whether or not we should be wearing masks and we're infringing on people's freedoms. Like, we're having the wrong conversation right now. So
I appreciate the fact that you were willing to jump right in and talk about COVID-19. That probably took up maybe 75% of this interview, but I appreciate the knowledge and the science that you brought to the conversation. And I'm sorry that we didn't get to more on Alexandria, but I think it was really relevant and actually such a time as this, we needed it. And this is what the people wanted to get from you as an expert. So we appreciate your time. It's about 4:56. Before you leave, is there anything that you want to leave to this LT class of 2020? Anything that you want to say to them, or any words of encouragement based on your experience with LT?
Well, I love Leadership Tomorrow. In many ways, it has given me a network of friends and people who can really challenge me and help me grow. And as I've grown in my career and tried on new things, it's given me people that I can lean on and really test some things and build partnerships and coalitions. I'm so proud of LT and where that is still kicking. I feel I wish you all were able to be with each other. I think that part is such an important part. But that you all are resilient and still making this thing happen. We need this next generation leadership, and you're going to be entering a time when we emerge from this thing, Seattle will be different. It will be different, and what will be your place in it? And I think that's the question for all of you. And Julie has my contact info. Frank has my contact info. My Twan has my contact. Like, just call me, and I'm more than happy to be a part of your world as well. So best of luck. And
much. Everybody feels like you got a future in motivational speaking. You got all kind of comments out here that's just really thanking you and just praising you for the information that you've given us. We really appreciate your time over and over again, just being able to, and willing and able to give to Leadership Tomorrow. So thank you for your time. We appreciate you. We're going to be logging off right now.
All right.
For those that are part of LT 2020, please stay on the line. We're going to give you an opportunity to kind of, get with your